Ladies and gentlemen, today we tackle a question that seems simple yet often sparks confusion. Is Canada part of the USA? You might be surprised by how often this misconception arises, so let's set the record straight. First and foremost, Canada is not, and never has been, part of the United States. It is a completely separate and sovereign nation with its own government, economy, and global identity. While the two countries share a long history, Canada took a different path, choosing to remain under British rule before gaining full independence. Now, let's talk politics. Canada and the USA may be neighbors, but they operate under very different systems. Canada is a constitutional monarchy, meaning it has a prime minister and recognizes a monarch as the head of state. Meanwhile, the USA is a federal republic led by a president. These differences shape everything from governance to national values. But it's not just politics. Our cultures and laws also set us apart. Canada has universal healthcare, stricter gun laws, and a distinct legal system based on British common law and French civil law. Meanwhile, the USA has its own approaches to these policies, creating unique national identities. That being said, the bond between Canada and the USA is undeniable. We share the longest undefended border in the world, proving that two distinct nations can maintain peace and cooperation. Economically, we are each other's largest trading partners, working together in commerce, defense, and diplomacy. So, the next time someone asks, is Canada part of the USA, you'll know the answer. We are neighbors, allies, and friends, but we are not the same country. Understanding this distinction is essential, not just for geography, but for appreciating the unique identity of each nation. One of the most common misconceptions, especially among those unfamiliar with North American geography, is that Canada is part of the United States. While the two countries share a long border, a deep economic relationship, and cultural similarities, Canada is an entirely separate and sovereign nation with its own distinct government, laws, and policies. Historically, Canada and the United States followed different paths. After the American Revolution, the 13 colonies broke away from British rule and formed the United States of America in 1776. However, the regions that now make up Canada, including Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritime provinces, remained under British control. Many loyalists, those who supported Britain during the American Revolution, moved north to what is now Canada, further solidifying its separate identity. While the USA fought wars to assert its independence, Canada evolved more gradually. It became a self-governing entity within the British Empire in 1867 through the British North America Act, which established the Dominion of Canada. Unlike the USA, which severed ties with Britain through war, Canada remained a British colony before gradually gaining full sovereignty. The process was peaceful and marked by agreements rather than revolts. Even today, Canada retains strong ties to Britain. It is a constitutional monarchy, recognizing the British monarch as its head of state. In contrast, the United States is a federal republic with a president as its leader. This difference alone highlights how Canada and the USA took separate political and historical paths. Legally, Canada and the United States are completely distinct. Canada has its own constitution, legal system, and national policies that differ significantly from those of the USA. For example, while both countries have democratic governments, Canada follows a parliamentary system with a prime minister, whereas the United States follows a presidential system with a directly elected leader. Geographically, Canada is the second largest country in the world by land area, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific and northward to the Arctic. It is not a part of the United States, but rather its own nation with 10 provinces and 3 territories. The two countries share the longest undefended border in the world, a testament to their peaceful coexistence and cooperation. So, while Canada and the USA may share a border, language, and trade agreements, they remain two distinct nations with their own histories, governments, and identities. The histories of Canada and the United States are deeply intertwined, but they have always been separate entities. Understanding their shared past helps explain why people sometimes assume Canada is, or was, part of the USA. However, Canada's history follows a unique path shaped by British and French influence, rather than the revolutionary spirit that led to the formation of the United States. Early beginnings, colonization and European influence. Both Canada and the United States were originally inhabited by indigenous peoples long before European settlers arrived. In the early 1600s, France and Britain established colonies in what is now Canada, while British settlers also established the 13 colonies, which later became the United States. The French controlled large areas of land, primarily in what is now Quebec, Ontario, and parts of the Maritimes, while the British controlled the Atlantic coastal regions and parts of present-day Canada. In 1763, after the 7 Years' War, France ceded its North American territories to Britain under the Treaty of Paris. This gave Britain full control over both the 13 colonies and the regions that would later become Canada. However, while the 13 colonies eventually sought independence from British rule, the Canadian territories remained loyal to the Crown, the American Revolution, and Loyalist influence. One of the most defining moments in the separation of Canada and the United States was the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. The 13 colonies fought against British rule, leading to the formation of the United States of America in 1776. However, not all residents of the colonies supported the revolution. Many remained loyal to Britain. These loyalists fled north, settling in what is now Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritime provinces. The influx of these British loyalists solidified Canada's identity as a region separate from the United States. The British government, eager to reward their loyalty, granted them land and resources, helping to establish new communities in Canada. This migration created a clear divide. While the United States was built on a foundation of independence and rebellion, Canada remained under British rule, emphasizing stability and loyalty to the Crown. The War of 1812, a fight for Canada's identity. The War of 1812 was another pivotal event that reinforced Canada's separation from the United States. Tensions between Britain and the USA led to an American invasion of British North America, modern-day Canada. The United States believed that Canadians would welcome them as liberators, but instead, Canadian militias, alongside British forces and Indigenous allies, successfully resisted American expansion. The war ended in 1814 with no territorial changes, but it had a lasting impact on Canada's identity. The successful defense against the USA fostered a sense of Canadian nationalism, reinforcing the idea that Canada was distinct from its southern neighbor. This event is often seen as a key moment in Canada's path towards self-governance, proving that it was not just a British outpost, but a developing nation with its own identity. The road to Canadian independence. Unlike the United States, which gained independence through war, Canada's journey to sovereignty was more gradual. In 1867, the British North America Act, now called the Constitution Act, 1867, united Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia into the Dominion of Canada. This marked the beginning of Canada's transition to self-rule, though it remained part of the British Empire. Over time, Canada continued to gain more independence. The Statute of Westminster, 1931, granted Canada full control over its laws, and the Constitution Act of 1982 severed the last legal ties to Britain, making Canada fully sovereign. Despite this, Canada chose to retain the British monarch as its symbolic head of state, further distinguishing itself from the United States. Why Canada never became part of the USA? At various points in history, there were discussions about Canada joining the United States, but it never happened. Several key factors prevented this. Loyalty to Britain. Many Canadians, particularly in the early days, identified strongly with Britain and did not want to join a republic that had fought against it. Cultural and political differences. Canada developed a unique identity rooted in British and French traditions, differing from the American model of democracy and governance. Economic and military resistance. Canada successfully resisted American attempts at expansion, particularly in the War of 1812. Gradual independence. Unlike the USA, Canada gained independence peacefully and never needed to break away through revolution. While Canada and the United States share many historical ties, they have always remained separate. Their unique paths, one forged through revolution, the other through gradual independence, explain why Canada was never and will never be part of the United States. One of the clearest distinctions between Canada and the United States lies in their political systems. While they are both democratic nations, the way their governments operate is vastly different. Canada follows a constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy, while the United States operates under a federal republic with a presidential system. These differences shape everything from leadership selection to how laws are made and implemented. Canada, a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary system. Canada's political system is unique because it combines British traditions with a federal structure similar to the United States. As a constitutional monarchy, Canada recognizes a monarch, currently the British King, as the symbolic head of state. However, the King does not govern Canada directly. Instead, his powers are largely ceremonial, and real political authority lies with elected officials. The Governor-General, appointed by the King on the advice of the Prime Minister, acts as the monarch's representative in Canada. The Governor-General's role is largely symbolic, signing bills into law and performing ceremonial duties, while actual governance is carried out by Canada's Parliament. At the heart of Canada's democracy is its parliamentary system, which is modeled after Britain's. The key components of the Canadian government include the Prime Minister, the head of government, responsible for running the country and making key decisions. The Parliament consists of two chambers. The House of Commons, elected representatives who create laws. The Senate, appointed members who review and revise legislation. The Governor-General, the King's representative, who gives royal assent to laws but does not influence governance. One of the biggest differences between Canada and the USA is how leaders are chosen. In Canada, citizens do not vote directly for their Prime Minister. Instead, they elect members of Parliament, MPs, in local districts, and the leader of the political party that wins the most seats becomes Prime Minister. This means a Prime Minister can govern without winning the popular vote, as long as their party holds a majority in Parliament. Another key aspect of Canada's government is responsible government, which means the Prime Minister and Cabinet must maintain the confidence of Parliament. If they lose a confidence vote, they may be forced to resign, leading to new elections. The United States, a presidential system with a federal republic. In contrast, the United States operates as a federal republic, meaning power is divided between a national, federal, government, and individual state governments. Unlike Canada's parliamentary system, the USA follows a presidential system, where the president is both the head of state and the head of government. The U.S. government is divided into three branches. Executive branch, led by the president, who is elected directly by citizens through the Electoral College. The president serves a fixed 4-year term and cannot be removed from office simply because Congress disagrees with their policies. Legislative branch consists of Congress, which has two chambers. The House of Representatives, elected based on state population. The Senate, each state has 2 senators, regardless of population. Judicial branch, led by the Supreme Court, which interprets laws and ensures they follow the U.S. Constitution. Unlike in Canada, where the Prime Minister can be removed through a vote of no confidence, the U.S. President serves a fixed 4-year term and can only be removed through impeachment, which is a complex legal process. Another major difference is how laws are passed. In Canada, because the Prime Minister and their cabinet are part of Parliament, they can usually pass laws quickly if they have a majority. In the U.S., the President and Congress are separate entities, meaning the President must negotiate with legislators to pass laws. This can lead to gridlock, where little progress is made due to political disagreements. Key differences between Canada and the USA's political systems. Monarchy versus Republic. Canada recognizes the British monarch as its head of state, while the USA has a president who is both head of state and head of government. Parliamentary versus presidential system. Canada's Prime Minister is elected indirectly through Parliament, while the U.S. President is directly elected by citizens. Election process. Canada's government can call elections early if necessary, while U.S. presidential elections occur every 4 years on a fixed schedule. Legislative power. In Canada, the Prime Minister usually has more control over passing laws, while in the USA, the President must work with Congress, often leading to political gridlock. Removal of leaders. The Prime Minister can be removed by a vote of no confidence, while the U.S. President can only be removed through impeachment. These structural differences define the political cultures of Canada and the United States, leading to unique styles of governance and policymaking. Despite being close neighbors and sharing many similarities, Canada and the United States have distinct cultures and legal systems that shape the daily lives of their citizens. While they share a common language, historical ties, and economic partnerships, they differ in fundamental ways, from social values and government policies to healthcare, gun laws, and even attitudes toward multiculturalism. Legal system: British influence versus American constitutionalism. One of the most significant differences between the two nations is their legal foundation. Canada's legal system is based on British common law, except for the province of Quebec, which follows civil law due to its French heritage. This means that Canadian laws are heavily influenced by British legal traditions, including a focus on precedent, past rulings, and judicial interpretation. In contrast, the United States follows a constitutional legal system, where laws are interpreted based on the U.S. Constitution. The American legal system emphasizes the separation of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, which often leads to legal battles over constitutional rights. In the U.S., the Supreme Court plays a powerful role in shaping laws, particularly regarding personal freedoms, gun rights, and government authority. In Canada, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, adopted in 1982, plays a similar role in protecting individual rights. However, it allows for reasonable limits on certain freedoms if justified for the greater good of society. In the U.S., constitutional rights, such as free speech and gun ownership, are often seen as absolute, leading to fewer government restrictions in certain areas. Healthcare: universal system versus private insurance. One of the most well-known differences between Canada and the USA is healthcare. Canada has a universal healthcare system, meaning that all residents have access to medical care funded by taxes. The government ensures that essential healthcare services are available to everyone, regardless of income or employment status. Each province administers its own healthcare system, but basic coverage is guaranteed for all citizens. In contrast, the United States relies on a private healthcare system, where individuals must purchase health insurance, either through their employer or on their own. Those without insurance often face high medical costs, which can lead to financial struggles, even bankruptcy. While government programs like Medicare and Medicaid exist to help certain groups, seniors, low-income individuals, there is no universal guarantee of health care for all Americans. This difference reflects broader societal values. Canada prioritizes collective well-being and views healthcare as a human right, while the U.S. places greater emphasis on individual responsibility and market-driven solutions. Gun laws: strict regulations versus Second Amendment rights. Gun ownership is another major cultural and legal divide between Canada and the United States. In Canada, gun laws are strict and heavily regulated. Firearms owners must obtain a license, undergo background checks, and complete safety training. Handguns and semi-automatic weapons are restricted, and gun-related crimes carry severe penalties. In contrast, the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects the right to bear arms, making gun ownership a deeply ingrained part of American culture. Many U.S. states allow citizens to carry firearms in public, and gun ownership is often seen as a symbol of personal freedom. While some regulations exist, overall, the U.S. has far more relaxed gun laws compared to Canada. The result? Gun violence rates in the U.S. are significantly higher than in Canada. Mass shootings, which are rare in Canada, occur frequently in the United States, fueling ongoing debates about gun control. While Canada still has some issues with gun crime, especially related to smuggling from the U.S., its strict regulations help keep firearm-related violence lower than in America. Multiculturalism and immigration policies. Both Canada and the United States are immigrant-friendly nations, but they take different approaches to diversity. Canada officially promotes multiculturalism, which means that the government actively supports and celebrates cultural diversity. This approach allows immigrants to retain their cultural identities while integrating into Canadian society. Canada also has a points-based immigration system, which prioritizes skilled workers and ensures a steady influx of newcomers who contribute to the economy. The United States, on the other hand, has long been described as a melting pot, meaning immigrants are encouraged to assimilate into mainstream American culture. While the U.S. has historically welcomed millions of immigrants, debates over immigration policies, border security, and undocumented migration are more politically divisive than in Canada. Canada's immigration policies are generally more open, and the country consistently ranks among the world's most accepting nations for newcomers. In contrast, the U.S. has a more complex and controversial immigration system, with frequent political debates over border security and undocumented migrants. Social policies and public services. Canadian society tends to lean more towards social welfare policies, offering stronger government support for education, social services, and worker protections. The government funds many essential services, including paid parental leave, up to 18 months in some provinces, affordable higher education, lower tuition fees compared to the U.S., strong labor protections, higher minimum wages, and worker benefits. In the U.S., there is a greater emphasis on free market solutions, meaning individuals are expected to take more responsibility for healthcare, education, and retirement savings. While the U.S. has a highly developed economy, it lacks universal social programs like paid maternity leave or affordable college tuition. Many aspects of life, such as student debt and medical expenses, can be much higher in the U.S. compared to Canada. Cultural attitudes. Politeness versus individualism. While cultural stereotypes should always be taken with caution, there are noticeable differences in the general attitudes and social behaviors of Canadians and Americans. Canadians are often described as polite, reserved, and community-oriented. The culture places a strong emphasis on courtesy, inclusivity, and collective well-being. Americans, by contrast, are often viewed as more outspoken, individualistic, and competitive. The culture encourages self-reliance, ambition, and personal success. These attitudes are reflected in many aspects of daily life, from customer service interactions to political discussions. While both Canadians and Americans are proud of their respective nations, Canadians tend to embrace a more humble and diplomatic approach, whereas Americans often display strong patriotism and assertiveness in expressing their views. Key takeaways. Why culture and laws matter. Although Canada and the USA are geographically close and share many traditions, their cultures and legal systems create very different ways of life. From healthcare and gun laws to social policies and immigration, the two nations reflect distinct values that shape how their citizens experience daily life. These differences reinforce why Canada is not just a northern extension of the United States, but a unique country with its own identity, policies, and cultural outlook. Canada and the United States have one of the strongest economic relationships in the world, with deeply interconnected trade, investment, and labor markets. However, despite their close economic ties, the two countries have different economic structures, policies, and industries that set them apart. Canada is not merely an extension of the U.S. economy. It has its own distinct strengths, challenges, and global trade strategies. A close but independent trade relationship. Trade between Canada and the United States is enormous. The two countries share the longest undefended border in the world, and this proximity has allowed for seamless economic cooperation. The U.S. is Canada's largest trading partner, and Canada is the U.S.'s second-largest trading partner after China. A significant milestone in their economic relationship was the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, signed in 1994. NAFTA eliminated most tariffs between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, boosting cross-border trade. In 2020, NAFTA was replaced by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, which modernized trade rules and introduced new labor and environmental protections. Despite this deep integration, Canada remains economically independent, managing its own trade relationships with other nations. Unlike the U.S., which often focuses on domestic markets and bilateral trade, Canada is heavily export-dependent, meaning it relies on trade with multiple countries to sustain its economy. Canada has trade agreements with Europe, CETA, the Asia-Pacific region, CPTPP, and other international markets, reducing its reliance on the United States. While the U.S. economy is massive and largely self-sustaining, Canada must diversify its trade partners to ensure economic stability. Key differences in economic structures. Although both Canada and the United States are highly developed, market-driven economies, they have distinct economic structures. The U.S. economy is larger, more diverse, and innovation-driven, while Canada's economy is resource-rich, export-focused, and service-oriented. 1. Natural resources versus technology and innovation. Canada's economy is deeply tied to natural resources, including oil, gas, timber, minerals, and fresh water. Alberta's oil sands, Saskatchewan's potash, and British Columbia's forestry industry play crucial roles in Canada's economic success. The country is one of the world's top exporters of energy, making it a key player in the global commodity market. In contrast, the U.S. economy is more diverse, with a strong emphasis on technology, finance, and consumer markets. The United States is home to the world's leading tech giants, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, while Canada has a smaller but growing tech sector. While Canada has thriving industries in artificial intelligence, AI, clean energy, and aerospace, its technology sector is still developing compared to Silicon Valley. Canada has made efforts to attract tech talent, particularly through immigration-friendly policies, but its economy remains more reliant on traditional industries like energy and mining. 2. Manufacturing and industrial differences. Manufacturing is a key part of both economies, but with major differences in scale and scope. The U.S. has a massive industrial base, producing everything from automobiles and airplanes to pharmaceuticals and consumer goods. Canada, while strong in manufacturing, plays a supporting role, particularly in industries like automotive production, aircraft manufacturing, and industrial machinery. One notable example is the auto industry. Many car parts are made in Canada, assembled in the U.S., and then shipped back across the border. This integrated supply chain demonstrates how closely linked the two economies are, yet Canada still operates as an independent player, working with other global partners as well. Different economic policies and government involvement. 1. Government role in the economy. Canada has a more regulated economy, where the government plays a significant role in industries like healthcare, transportation, and energy. Publicly funded institutions, such as Canadian National Railway, CN, Hydro-Quebec, and the Canada Pension Plan, CPP, demonstrate Canada's approach to maintaining government involvement in key sectors. In contrast, the U.S. economy leans more toward free market capitalism, with less government intervention in industries. While the U.S. does regulate certain sectors, private companies dominate areas like healthcare, telecommunications, and energy production. Canada's government also provides more social safety nets, such as unemployment benefits, affordable childcare programs, and retirement pensions. The U.S. has some government support programs, but they are often more limited compared to Canada's universal benefits. 2. Taxation. Higher in Canada, lower in the U.S. Taxation is another major difference between the two countries. Canada has higher taxes than the United States, which funds social programs like universal healthcare, education subsidies, and public infrastructure. In contrast, the U.S. has lower tax rates, but Americans pay more out-of-pocket expenses for services like healthcare, higher education, and retirement savings. The trade-off is clear. Canadians pay more in taxes but receive more government services, while Americans keep more of their income but must cover more personal expenses. 3. Minimum wage and labor laws. Canada's labor laws tend to be more worker-friendly than those in the United States. The minimum wage is higher in Canada than in many U.S. states, and Canadian workers enjoy benefits such as paid parental leave up to 18 months, universal health care coverage, stronger union protections. In contrast, U.S. labor laws are more employer-driven, with fewer guarantees for paid leave or health care. The U.S. economy is highly entrepreneurial, but this also means greater economic inequality and fewer worker protections compared to Canada. Different approaches to economic growth. Despite their similarities, Canada and the United States take different approaches to economic growth and stability. Canada focuses on long-term, sustainable growth, particularly through investment in renewable energy, infrastructure, and immigration-driven labor expansion. The United States relies on rapid innovation, large-scale consumer markets, and high-risk entrepreneurship to drive economic growth. For example, While the US is a global leader in venture capital and startups, Canada has more cautious investment practices, with a focus on stable industries like banking, natural resources, and public services. Canada's big banks, RBC, TD, Scotiabank, BMO, CIBC, are highly regulated and more conservative than many US banks, which allows Canada to avoid financial crises more effectively. The 2008 financial crisis had a devastating impact on the US, while Canada's banking system remained largely stable due to stricter regulations. Conclusion: a strong partnership, but two distinct economies. Canada and the United States share one of the most interconnected economies in the world, yet they remain separate and independent economic powers. While trade and investment flow freely between the two nations, Canada maintains its own industries, policies, and global trade relationships. Canada's economy is defined by its resource wealth, government-supported social programs, and trade partnerships, while the U.S. thrives on innovation, free markets, and a massive consumer base. These differences reinforce why Canada is not just an extension of the United States, but a self-sustaining, economically distinct nation with its own strengths, challenges, and global influence. At the heart of the question, is Canada part of the USA, lies the fundamental issue of sovereignty and national identity. While both countries share historical ties, geographic proximity, and many similarities, Canada and the United States have developed distinct identities shaped by their different political, cultural, and social experiences. These differences reflect the sovereignty that both nations fiercely uphold and how they perceive their place in the world. Historical context of sovereignty. Canada's journey to independence from Britain was gradual, reflecting a more peaceful and diplomatic evolution compared to the United States' revolutionary birth. Canada remained a British colony for much longer than the American colonies, which declared their independence from Britain in 1776 through the American Revolution. Canada didn't gain full legislative independence from Britain until the Statute of Westminster in 1931, and only became a fully sovereign nation with the patriation of the Canadian Constitution in 1982. Until then, British legal authority remained an influential force in Canadian governance. This long process of gaining sovereignty meant that Canada developed a distinct political identity, rooted in British traditions like the monarchy, while still cultivating a uniquely Canadian outlook. In contrast, the United States was founded explicitly as an independent republic. The American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence in 1776 marked a clear break from British colonial rule. The newly formed United States established its own constitution, designed to reflect values of freedom, democracy, and self-governance, forging a powerful sense of national identity rooted in these principles. While both countries share many common roots, such as British colonial history, their paths towards self-rule have shaped them into two fundamentally distinct sovereign nations. Canada's gradual transition to independence, paired with its strong ties to the British Commonwealth, sets it apart from the U.S.'s immediate, revolutionary embrace of full autonomy. National identity, a tale of two nations. The idea of national identity is inextricably linked to sovereignty, and it is perhaps the most significant factor that differentiates Canada from the United States. Although both countries have been shaped by Western values and democratic principles, they see themselves through different lenses when it comes to their global roles, their cultural identities, and the ways they engage with the world. 1. Canadian national identity, a culture of unity and multiculturalism. Canada prides itself on being a multicultural nation, one that welcomes diversity as one of its core values. The Canadian identity is based on the idea that a wide range of cultures, languages, and beliefs can coexist within a unified country. Unlike the United States, which has long promoted the melting pot model where immigrants are expected to assimilate into the American culture, Canada encourages multiculturalism, celebrating the preservation of cultural identities while fostering national unity. The Canadian government actively supports multiculturalism through policies that encourage the integration of immigrants into society while allowing them to maintain their cultural heritage. This has led to Canada becoming one of the most immigrant-friendly countries in the world. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, part of the Constitution, guarantees protections against discrimination based on race, religion, or cultural background, ensuring the inclusivity of Canadian society. Furthermore, Canada has historically viewed itself as a peacekeeping nation on the world stage. Canadians are known for their values of cooperation, diplomacy, and support for international human rights. The country's military, though well-trained, is often associated with peacekeeping missions rather than aggressive interventions, differentiating Canada from the more militarily interventionist policies of the United States. 2. American national identity, a legacy of independence and individualism. In the United States, the national identity is rooted in the ideals of freedom, individualism, and the pursuit of happiness. The American motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one, reflects the nation's goal of uniting a diverse population under a shared set of values rather than encouraging people to retain their cultural distinctions. The idea of the American dream, that anyone, regardless of background, can achieve success through hard work, has been a central cultural theme in the U.S. for generations. Unlike Canada, which emphasizes the value of community and shared social services, the United States tends to place a higher value on individual rights and personal responsibility. Americans are more likely to view self-reliance as the key to prosperity, and freedom of choice is often seen as the highest form of liberty. This has led to political and social debates over the role of government. Where Canada may advocate for universal health care and social safety nets, the U.S. has long struggled with a more market-driven, individualistic approach to services and welfare. On the world stage, the United States has often viewed itself as a global leader with a mission to promote democracy and capitalism. The U.S. is also more militarily assertive than Canada, with its military interventions in various global conflicts reflecting its belief in its role as a superpower with the responsibility to lead and influence international affairs. Sovereignty in action, political and legal systems. The differences in national identity are mirrored in the political and legal systems of the two countries. Canada, a constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy. Canada's political system reflects its unique sovereignty. As a constitutional monarchy, Canada recognizes a monarch as the head of state, currently the British monarch, though the monarch's role is largely ceremonial. The political power is actually held by the Prime Minister, who is elected as the leader of the party that wins the most seats in the House of Commons. This parliamentary system is a legacy of Canada's British heritage. Canada's political framework is built on a culture of compromise. The country's constitution emphasizes the importance of the rights and freedoms of individuals, but also guarantees the preservation of national unity. This is achieved through policies like bilingualism, English and French, decentralized federalism, and active protection of indigenous rights. United States, a presidential democracy with a strong constitution. In the United States, sovereignty is defined by the U.S. Constitution, which outlines the rights of individuals and establishes the separation of powers among the three branches of government. The president is both the head of state and the head of government, a powerful position that reflects the American commitment to individual liberty and self-determination. The Constitution plays a pivotal role in the legal and political system, often serving as a litmus test for decisions made by the Supreme Court. American sovereignty is tightly intertwined with a deep reverence for the Constitution as a document that guarantees freedom, equality, and personal rights. The American system of checks and balances ensures that no one branch of government gains too much power, which helps to reinforce the sovereignty of the people and the independence of each state. Canada's relationship with the British Commonwealth. One of the most significant symbols of Canadian sovereignty is its ongoing relationship with the British Commonwealth. While Canada is fully independent and no longer governed by the British Crown, it still retains a constitutional connection to the monarchy. The Governor-General of Canada, who represents the British monarch, is an important symbol of Canada's history and ongoing constitutional monarchy system. However, Canada's sovereignty is not constrained by its connection to the British Crown. Over the years, Canada has increasingly distanced itself from Britain and has embraced a distinct Canadian identity. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, added to the Constitution in 1982, was a significant step in solidifying Canada's sovereignty, ensuring that Canada's legal and political system was no longer subject to British influence. National identity: Canada and the USA as separate entities. In conclusion, Canada and the United States may share similarities, but their sovereignty and national identity are distinctly different. Canada's path to independence, its constitutional monarchy, and its commitment to multiculturalism and social welfare define it as a unique, sovereign nation. On the other hand, the U.S., founded on ideals of individualism and freedom, has developed its own strong sense of national identity rooted in Republican values and self-reliance. Both countries, while maintaining close economic and cultural ties, operate as separate entities on the world stage, each with its own sovereignty, political systems, and national pride. In conclusion, while Canada and the United States share a deep historical connection, a vast border, and many cultural similarities, the idea that Canada is simply part of the USA is a misconception. The two countries have forged distinct national identities over time, each with its own sovereignty, political system, and cultural values. Canada, with its constitutional monarchy, multiculturalism, and commitment to social welfare, stands as a fully independent nation, navigating the global stage with a unique set of priorities and challenges. The United States, with its emphasis on individual freedom, democratic ideals, and market-driven capitalism, remains a global powerhouse with its own set of ambitions and values. While the economic ties between the two countries are undeniable, these differences in political systems, cultural identities, and sovereign histories reaffirm that Canada and the USA are not one and the same. Canada's journey toward independence and its ongoing commitment to its distinct identity ensure that it will always be a sovereign nation, standing apart from its southern neighbor, despite the strong partnership they share. In the end, understanding the truth about Canada's sovereignty and national identity only strengthens the appreciation of both countries' uniqueness and the remarkable relationship they maintain as neighbors and partners in a shared world.